We're really excited today to present to you the All-In Research Network for our first public launch event. So thank you for joining us to learn more about the network and to join our panelists and our distinguished guests. We thank you very much. Just quickly by way of housekeeping, this event is being recorded and will be made available after the event. Please feel free to use the chat function to discuss as we move through the event. And you can also submit any questions through the Q&A function, which you'll see as an option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're going to be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A throughout the event, and we'll respond as we go as appropriate and as makes sense to do so. But we'll also pause a couple times throughout the presentation and then again at the end to answer any questions and to provide some time for that. Please feel free to introduce yourself as well and let us know where you're joining from in the chat. We'd love to learn more about you who are here today. Also, please feel free to follow us and tag us on Twitter, allin_network, as we go through the event and moving forward after the event. We'd appreciate meeting you there as well. So just quickly, I wanted to introduce our agenda. We'll be doing a brief introduction to the All-In Research Network from the All-In management team, which you'll meet shortly. We'll move into a keynote address and then a panel discussion on local research capacity and the role of local research and evidence. We'll have a last Q&A session before our closing remarks. So briefly, I wanted to introduce the managing partners of the All-In Research Network. So the International Center of Evaluation Development is the first Africa-based international think tank that combines research and innovation with extensive practical experience and evaluation for development in Africa. With operating headquarters in Kenya and a West Africa regional office in Accra, Ghana, and a range of emerging international alliances and partnerships, ICE is poised to use and enhance the value of evaluation to contribute to the development outcomes and impacts that address the opportunities of today and the future. Our second partner is the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Markets, Risk, and Resilience at University of California, Davis. We develop and test financial and market innovations that take the most promising agricultural tools for families in developing countries from the lab to the field. The lab's mission is to generate and transfer knowledge and innovations that promote resilience and empower rural families, communities, and markets to share in inclusive agricultural growth. So, today, we're going to be launching the All-In Research Network. Many of you may already be familiar with the All-In initiative, but I know it might be new to many of you as well. So I wanted to introduce the All-In initiative. The Advancing Local Leadership Innovation and Networks initiative was established as a partnership between the MRR Innovation Lab at UC Davis and the International Center for Evaluation and Development, ICE. All-In researchers at African institutions lead these collaborations, leveraging their local knowledge, skills, and ideas to build actionable evidence for promoting resilience and empowering rural families and communities to share in inclusive agricultural growth. So All-In is a USAID-funded collaborative research grant program that supports 12 projects, each with a maximum award of $450,000. This All-In funding provides opportunity for institutions, both researchers and staff, to learn by doing in collaboration with mentors and peers at the All-In management institutions, ICE and MRR. The All-In collaborative team provides support as needed and appropriate to researchers and their project managers to develop the capacity to manage and lead similar large-scale research awards in the future. So this is kind of the foundational work of this partnership that got us really going in this way. And as we continue to talk and work with partners, we wanted to take this collaboration and this opportunity and make it a little bigger and broader, which is actually what led us to the All-In Research Network. So inspired by and building off of our experience with the All-In initiative, today we're launching the All-In Research Network. The All-In Research Network supports and strengthens the capacity of the African economics research community to fully engage and take the lead in defining research priorities that build pathways to local policy impacts. ARN supports the creation of locally led, locally relevant research agendas and its engagement with local research institutions, leveraging local expertise and relationships with stakeholders and policymakers to share recommendations. So this approach will also narrow the gap between national pilot research studies and research in general and program design to try to increase the impacts of research investments that are made. So just with that very brief introduction, I wanted to pass to David Amioff, the president and CEO of ICE, to provide a bit more background and a little bit more on the motivation behind the research network. David?
Thank you very much, Tara. I'm so happy that eventually something that was a dream have eventually come to reality. And today we are here to launch the All-In Research Network. I'm so happy to see currently over 80 people who have signed into this public launch of the All-In. All-In, as I just said, is a dream and a vision that has come in. I remember somewhere in 2016, when I was invited by the Market Risk and Resiliency Innovation Lab to a conference in Washington, and sitting down at the Reagan Building, which is the USAID head office in Washington, DC, and looking at all the researchers that were presenting papers that have been conceptualized, designed, implemented in developing country, and the results being presented in Washington, DC, the question came to my mind: why is it that evidence that are being generated from developing countries, global south, being shared in global north without leadership and politicians in global south sitting at the table so that they can use those evidence for decision making? This started a dialogue between ICE and the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Market Risk and Resiliency to be able to allow host country leadership to have the evidence in defining and implement research concepts in their own country. We decided that developing countries or global south need the skills and knowledge and opportunity to generate evidence that will be able to support their policymakers in shaping policies that affect livelihood in this country. Therefore, the concept of All-In was born, and through the generosity of the Feed the Future Innovation Lab, All-In was written as part of their concept for renewal of their Innovation Lab grant that Feed the Future USAID is funding. We were able to launch the first All-In solicitation that required African researchers to lead the value chain of research. When we talk about value chain of research, we were thinking about African researchers conceptualizing their own research initiative, developing their own hypothesis, sitting down and developing their proposal, submitting the proposal to funders for funding, going through the review that every proposal, research proposal goes through, being able to sit down and negotiate the requirements and funding for the proposal, being able to start the proposal, working through all the data collection, doing all the dissemination, generating the evidence, if possible, publishing it in a peer-reviewed journal, but the ultimate goal of using the research funding to influence policy and action in their own country. When the solicitation went out, over 168 concept notes were received. We allowed everybody who have submitted a concept note to proceed to develop a full proposal. Out of the 168, 124 full proposals were submitted by African researchers from all countries and from over 40 institutions. When we sat down and we did administrative review of the proposals, the 125, about 60 of them were not in compliance with the solicitation, so they were rejected. And then 64 of them were sent to peer review to be reviewed by people who are in the specific industry that the proposal is about. Each proposal went to 2 peer reviewers. When the result came, out of the 64 proposals that were sent to peer reviewers, only 28 out of 64 were recommended for funding. And the recommendation were yes, no, yes, maybe, and then maybe. So due to lack of funding, we decided to work with the yes and the yes, maybe. We engaged the yes, maybes, and eventually, as Tala said, 12 proposals were selected for full funding, which was approximately 450. Currently, the All-In is supporting 12 African-led, African-based, African institution research that are going on in 6 countries in about 8 universities in Africa. You know, I happened to be in Nigeria last 2 weeks, going through to visit 3 of our research projects, seeing Africa PIs, co-PIs, PhD fellows, research assistants in the field working. And it was so much enriching. Sitting down, visiting the community, people who just understand and appreciate what is going on. My experience in Amerobero University in Northern Nigeria show me that one of our co-PI is the economic advisor to the Kaduna State University. The other one is on the Nigeria Federal Aviation Authority Commission. And I was sitting down there looking at these people sitting down as co-PIs and thinking about how they can use their results, the result of their research, to influence policy in their own country. It was very, very enriching. But based on that, we said that, okay, we cannot really influence policy in developing country working with only 12 researchers. How do we work with the 168 who were not fortunate to be selected? Therefore, the concept of All-In Research Network came into being, that we need to bring all those researchers who are interested and be able to, one, support them to strengthen their research capacity, give them opportunity to share their experiences, join them within core teams where they have interests so that they can get support from their own peer, people who understand them, and then be able to really get the opportunity to develop research that can influence policy. Long time ago, I learned something from Philippines, and they have a saying that the poor do not lack brains, they lack opportunities. And it has always been in my mind that giving developing countries researchers opportunity, they may be able to lead and shape policies that form their own national agenda. Therefore, today, I'm so excited that we are launching the All-In Research Network. It's a network that starts from the grassroots, a network that is not donor-driven, a network that is being developed by a passion to really come up with evidence to support decisions in our individual country. It's a network that are owned by developing country researchers, and it's a network that is accountable to developing country researchers, and it's a network that is going to be used to shape policies that affect men, women, children, vulnerable people, indigenous people in developing countries. We are happy to have this research network going. And I hope that all those who have got an opportunity to be part of this network will contribute any way they can, be able to make this research network different. It's different from any other research network in the sense that you own it, you manage it, and you are responsible for its success. Welcome and happy to have you in this public launching of All In Research Network. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, David. I appreciate your introduction there. Now quickly I want to transition just briefly to Michael Carter with the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Markets, Risk and Resilience at University of California, Davis to provide some additional remarks about the long-term vision for the research network. So Michael, with that, I pass it to you.
Okay, thank you, Tara, and David, thank you for that great introduction. I'll say just a very few things to amplify several of the points that David has already made quite eloquently. I'm very privileged to have been an academic researcher in US research universities for my career. I'm a member of many networks. Many of those networks actually have extended fellowships and training opportunities with scholars from African and other countries. I've certainly hosted my share of those scholars over the years. It's always nice. They sort of watch me do research. I give them some feedback on their proposals, but the thing that's always missing is the opportunity. And going back to 2015, when David and I first started this, we said, you know, somebody has to go all in. That's where we got the name. Someone actually has to put the research money there and go all in and give these researchers who have been trained, who have ideas, who have connections, as David just indicated, to give them the opportunity to really flourish, to really learn by doing. I don't think any of us really learn to do good quality research or dissemination just by being in school. So with the support of USAID that went along with our crazy idea to do this, we allocated a pretty substantial amount of money, roughly $6 million in research funds towards this endeavor. As David has already summarized, we had just a tremendous outpouring of interest. For us as people organizing this, that was absolutely horrifying because we didn't have the resources ready to go to review that many proposals, but we went through it. We eventually made it work. We're extremely happy, very excited about the proposals that were eventually funded and went through. One of the things we wanted to do, though, was to take advantage of that outpouring of interest. And with all those proposals, we could not give written feedback to all the investigators who had sent us their ideas. But what we did do, I think, was something that was quite unique. We held sessions, and then we invited all the losers of our grant competition. We invited a group to come to West Africa and a group to come to East Africa. And we actually sat down and went through the mechanics of proposal writing. And we went through their proposals and sort of looked at them and gave them pretty brute feedback. And I still remember I participated along with David and a number of our researchers who had won the awards. We participated in all of these events. And I had multiple people say to me, I thought my proposal was fantastic. And I was really angry with you when you didn't fund me. But now that I've been to this workshop, I actually realized my proposal wasn't very good, but now I know how to make it better. And it was that recognition and that enthusiasm, that grit, if you will, to use the word David employed a moment ago, that really inspired us is let's get a network going. Let's take advantage of this energy. Let's try to get some feedback so that we actually have some interest areas. And the network is self-organizing into people interested in agricultural topics or health and education topics, et cetera. So we really want to create a group of people who are working on their own ideas. They're not just responding to a funder's call for proposal, but they're working on things they think are important. And we hope by creating this network off of this foundation that we can actually have a a critical mass of people, and we can begin to come up with more funding so that we can have, again, additional rounds of the kind of funding that we were able to offer to only 12 proposals. So we see this as a very exciting moment. David and our institutions are committed to making this work. And as we'll be talking a little bit later on, we're hoping to enlist support and interest of a number of people in terms of how we can get others to go all in and really make investments in the kind of talented researchers that are out there right now and yet are often still looking for opportunities. So again, I'll add my welcome, my enthusiasm, my excitement to that others have already expressed. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Tara.
Great, thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that background and that vision for us. Now we just want to provide just a brief overview of some of the activities of the research network. We'll move quite quickly through this, but to that end, I wanted to introduce Anne-Sophie with the International Center for Evaluation and Development, the program manager for the research network, to take us through some of the principles and just introducing us to the network itself.
Thank you very much, Tara, for that introduction, and thank you for sharing the background and motivation and inspiration, Dr. David Amayao and Professor Michael Carter. I'll just go ahead and give the principles and share with you how we are looking to work within this network. So to start us off, I'll just take us through the key objectives we have for the All-In Research Network. And really, as Michael and David mentioned, we're looking to strengthen the capacity of African researchers to design and implement research, implement economics research, and we're looking to, through that, expand networks and build collaborative partnerships with institution experts and other key stakeholders, as we have today on board the Global Development Network and the Global Innovation Fund. Establish a cohort of expert African economic researchers that can respond to local and global research needs. And through this, we'll be able to increase recognition of and demand for African-led research. Overall, we're also looking to, mobilize resources in support of African-led development research. Yeah, so the kind of environment we want to create and guiding values and culture we have within the All-In Research Network is really, innovation, creating an environment where everybody feels comfortable being able to share their ideas and communicating their ideas. And as Michael said, not to typically respond to, funding ideas already set out. Teamwork, this obviously is going to increase learning opportunities from each other's strengths, and this leads to growth, collaboration, where the researchers are just able to fill and to complement each other's skills and contribute their own strengths. We've got passion, creating an environment that just encourages creative thinking and sharing of ideas, and having an empowered culture overall, and just pushing each and every individual to fully engage and participate fully in the network. So we'll be looking to achieve this through two ways. The first one is knowledge sharing and learning. The All-In Research Network provides opportunities for African economic researchers to learn by doing, in collaboration with mentors, peers from the network's management institutions and the research networks. We're also looking at capacity strengthening and really just, having the network support capacity strengthening of economists in Africa and global South countries, and have them to fully engage and take lead in defining research priorities that have impact on public policy in their countries. Some of the activities that we have within the network, but it's not limited to, this is just to get us started, and my colleague Tara is just going to take us through that a bit more in depth. So again, conducting capacity strengthening activities, and we've already had 2 in-person workshops, as David and Michael did mention earlier, last year. And we are looking to, have them complement and leverage the existing skills, talents, and ideas of African researchers. This is obviously through workshops, mentorships, and collaborative engagement, creating a forum of peer-to-peer learning and collaboration on proposal development and other related activities, and being able to facilitate network expansion and create opportunities both within the African research community and between the African researchers themselves. And we will be looking to do this through the digital networking platforms and having annual research convenings. Sharing opportunities, which we have been doing already with the members we have on board. And this is also, both on research funding, opportunities, fellowships, and networking, and really just promoting the visibility of contributions and evidence of African-based researchers. So the network was internally launched in about 3 months ago, March 8th, 2022, and we have about over 100 researchers on board. And at the start of the network, all members were asked to, kind of complete a survey to be able to help us get to know them better and, their existing capacities and where they would really like capacity strengthening. The first cohort of the ARN members has already begun, as we have mentioned, and we have more than 100 researchers. And really, it's ranging from the early career researchers with less than 5 years of experience and to highly experienced researchers with more than 20 years experience. It's quite diverse, to be fair, and we have about 18 thematic working groups, and we had to cluster, every individual within common themes. And some of the themes that really came out strongly are risk and resilience, gender, nutrition, financial tools, agdev, agricultural technology adoption, climate smart agriculture, and climate adaptation and market systems. So we'll be speaking more about the activities we do have and the working groups and the direction we're looking to take. So over to you, Tara. Thank you.
Hey, in the interest of time, thank you, Anne-Sophie. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go quite quickly and just emphasize the collaborative peer groups we formed, as Anne-Sophie said. We've formed about 18 groups already, and we really want these groups. We're trying to facilitate them and grow them into groups that can continue the work that we kind of began in workshops and kind of parallel that, where they really, group members have the opportunity to exchange ideas, get peer feedback, and share and develop in that way, building off the capacity, not only their own capacity, but leveraging the capacity and expertise of their peers within the group. I'll go ahead and move quickly past this, but we're really looking forward to that. And that's something we want to allow for year-round asynchronously. So we're trying to create some platforms to ease this so that people can work across the continent with their peers. We're also developing, as Anne-Sophie said, capacity strengthening workshops, and we really are trying to allow these workshops to be guided by member interest and demand so that we're responsive to the existing strengths, capacities of the researchers in the network and trying to respond to their demand and interest in new topics. So we're doing a lot of short workshops that are going to be online and recorded and shared with network members. And we're also exploring the idea of hosting more intensive multi-day workshops around some cutting edge topics in economics research and impact evaluation. So that's something we're looking to moving forward. Finally, we're going to be launching shortly a working paper series. So this is going to be a series open for submission from any ARN member. In the survey, roughly 95% of researchers in the network indicated an interest in contributing, with more than 60% already having a paper or papers that they're interested in contributing. So this is another opportunity to try to allow for peer feedback, for input, and to try to promote the visibility of the contributions that are already being made by our members to the broader global research community. With that, I'm going to pause briefly just for a Q&A. I don't want to wait too long because I want to get to our keynote speaker, but we did have one question come in that I think is appropriate at this point. And it relates, as we've mentioned several times, the All-In initiative is a USAID supported initiative. And a question came in the Q&A about trying to explore how the research network and how the All In initiative parallels the work that's being done by USAID more broadly towards investments in local entities and localization. And I know we have on here Don Steinberg, who's a senior advisor to the administrator at USAID. And Don, I wanted to invite you to respond to that and speak a little bit to USAID's priorities and directions and how this parallels that. So Don, do you mind making a quick comment?
Absolutely, I'm delighted, and just congratulations to this group. This is an idea that is very exciting to us. We recognize that in order to more effectively use our resources more resiliently and more equitably, we need to put local institutions in lead roles in the research agenda, in identifying sectors, in planning programs and implementing projects, and in evaluating progress. I think we've recognized that the ground truth and credibility and accountability that local partners bring to the table are essential for success in achieving collective objectives under the SDGs and the humanitarian bargain, whereas the current power dynamic is stacked to give all the best opportunities to bilateral and multilateral donors, to UN agencies, to international NGOs and research institutions, and even development contractors. And so in the administrator's vision of localization, we see four principal lines of effort that I'm going to go through really quickly. The first is simply channeling a larger percentage of our development and humanitarian awards to local civil society, academic institutions, businesses, and other groups that are supported by and accountable to their local community. And specifically, she pledged that 25% of our direct funding will go to these entities in the next 4 years, which is a fourfold increase over the current level, and that 50% of all of our projects over the next decade will put local partners in the lead to co-design, to set priorities, to drive implementations, and to evaluate the impact of our programs. Second, she recognizes that localization means completely changing the power dynamic and putting a seat at the table, and preferably at the head of the table, for local actors under the principle, nothing about us without us. She has stressed that there'll be a new focus on listening to the voices of marginalized populations, groups like women, people with disabilities, youth, the LGBTQI+ community, indigenous populations, displaced persons, and ethnic minorities. Third, and this is extremely important for this initiative, we are going to be adapting our planning process to reflect a local systems approach, which is tied to each country's unique political and social and economic and even environmental conditions. Donors simply cannot come to the table with preconceived notions of the sectors and the regions we want to work in. Instead, it is up to the local partners, including the research institutions, to align our contributions to the priorities that you identify. And finally, we are trying to achieve a role as a global public advocate and a thought leader for this agenda, using our convening authority, our partnerships, our voice, and the power of our example to persuade others to climb on the localization train. And in particular, I wanted to invite the participants in this webinar to also participate in a global convening towards the end of this summer that Administrator Power has announced. It will be led by Southern coalitions of NGOs and academic institutions. It will be designed to discuss and reaffirm concrete commitments to this agenda in a power neutral environment, where it is not the international partner leading the effort, but it is the people who are actually impacted by the programs themselves. So thanks for bearing with me through these comments. I just really wanted to reflect how excited we are about this initiative, and wish all of you the best of luck. And please feel free to communicate directly with me or others at USAID. I will put my email in the chat if you're interested in sharing views directly. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Don. I appreciate that. It sounds like there's quite a lot of overlap between all of our efforts. So we look forward to collaborating and communicating with USAID on what you described moving forward. I think this is absolutely great. So thank you for taking the time to join us and to contribute those remarks. We really appreciate it. And with that, David, I'm going to pass to you to introduce our keynote speaker. So David, do you mind taking it from this point?
Yes, Tara, thank you very much. We are so excited to have PS Permanent Secretary Julius Moya with us today as our keynote speaker. PS have been a supporter and also a participant of Evidence to Action in Africa and in Kenya and other parts of developing countries. PS used to be the head of Kenya Development Agenda Vision 2030. And the first time I met PS, he was the permanent secretary for planning in the National Treasury and Economic Planning Department in Kenya. And the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation was under his supervision. And that is when I first met him. And since the time I've met him, PS have been very active supporter in promoting local generated evidence for policy making. When we organized the first All Africa Evidence to Action Conference in Nairobi, Kenya, PS was active in drawing people from public sector to attend that conference. And we were able to make a big impression in the country and other parts of Africa through his participation and the participation of high-level government officials from Kenya. PS have hosted us in organizing workshops in different parts of Kenya for economists and evidence generators in Kenya, in number of occasions. Currently, PS Moya is the Permanent Secretary of National Treasury in the Republic of Kenya. He has a very busy schedule, but he accepted to be the keynote speaker. And I'm happy to share with you that PS and I had a two-way talk, and PS have decided to be a board member. He has accepted to be a board member of the International Center for Evaluation and Development. And one of the things that PS told me that really, really shocked me was how do we make policies in public sector? Maybe in his talk today, he will share that process with me, but we will organize a special session with network members for PS to take you through his experience in public sector as a researcher and what he has observed in the policy making process in public sector. So PS, welcome. We are happy to have you as our keynote speaker today.
Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where we are. Well, listening to David, I thought he was describing somebody else and not me. But there you go. So I want to appreciate everyone who is on this virtual meeting, where we are witnessing something that is novel, something that is new. And I want to appreciate the organizers, ICE, the leadership of Feed the Future, Innovation Lab, Markets, Risk and Resilience, and everyone who is here. We are all distinguished participants in our own way. And so let me start by saying that it is actually exciting to hear and to see where we are in this space now in terms of the area of research, the area of evidence, and how we can connect and make sure that we don't have dots that are leaving spaces which are not connected. So as I speak during this launch today, I want to emphasize the fact that it is very pleasing for me in the public sector to see this initiative where we are looking to create awareness and also have a good in-depth overview of what we are doing in the area of promoting credible development. So I hope through this initiative, we'll be able to generate actionable research and also reach key players in the international development community space. And there are many. I mean, we can talk about the sector experts, we can talk about researchers, we can talk about evaluators, talk about policymakers, research institutions, and different partners. And I think the trick is to make sure that we put all this in place in a mechanism, in a manner where we can create meaning out of all those players. And so I am grateful that I've been asked to share my views about 3 areas, which I'll speak around them, looking at values and visions for Africa researchers as we continue to engage in strengthening the networks towards the future. And that is the future in terms of development in Africa. And also just reflecting on the demand for research in government and also the importance of collaboration between government, where we do a lot of policy things and also we implement lots of projects and also drive the agenda of providing services to the citizens. So that collaboration between the government and research areas where we have researchers in public policy making and also implementation process is also very important. And then I think the gist of what I'll talk about is to emphasize a lot more on locally led research so that I can bring out African examples where we need to focus on. And so David has already mentioned my involvement with ICE over the 5 years that I have had a lot of interaction, and so I'll not dwell on that. But I want to remind us, as we get into occasions like this, it would be nice to have a framework of how we capture and document what it is that has come out, and then develop a framework where progressively we keep on monitoring how we are achieving against what we set out to do or what we have had and resolved in a session like this. So that way we can be saying that we have got a framework that enables us to make sure that we don't drop good ideas that are shared and come through in the various engagements that we have. And so let me see then how I can share a few things after laying that background and indicating how I will proceed along with my comments. And so one of the things that I would like to share with us before I get into a lot of detail is to share some metrics that characterize the status of development in Africa. Because I think for us, development is a focus, and seeing the outcome, seeing the impact of development will make a lot of sense to what we are doing. And so let's first of all address ourselves to Africa as a continent, which in terms of land area, Africa occupies 20% of the Earth's surface. That is 1/5 of the Earth's surface. And it is home to 1/5 of the world population. So a lot of symmetry there. fifth of the Earth surface, a fifth of the global population, actually about 1.4 billion people. But that is where the numbers that move together end. So when you look at other metrics, like development outcomes, it is very clear that there is a lot of urgency for us to focus on credible and accelerated growth and development in Africa. So first, I go to World Bank and I look at the World Bank Development Index that is based on the average wealth of a country's population. And it is evidence that the people of Africa have significantly less resources compared with the rest of the world. So in this kind of metric, 46% of the African countries fall in the low income category. Now, the global proportion of low income countries having been weighed down by Africa is 12%. And so you can see almost half of the countries in Africa are within the low income category. No country in Africa is in the high income category. But then if you look at the global average, about a third of all the countries in the world are in the high income category. So you can see then in terms of development outcomes as measured by the World Bank Development Index, we have a major problem in terms of development outcomes in Africa. Now, let's try another metric. We go to UNDP. Now, UNDP has a measure that they use where they combine the level of income, the literacy, and the life expectancy. And this is the Human Development Index that we are aware about and we talk about quite a lot, where the score for Africa is not even better. So if you look at African countries, all of them have an average score of 0.547 in the Human Development Index, which is quite low. So only one country, and that is Mauritius, has attained the very high human development ranking. Now, as expected, very few countries are in the category of high human development, and also the highest, which is the very high human development index. And so in this case, let me just clarify that more than half, indeed 56% of African countries are in the low human development category. And this suggests poor welfare outcomes for the people as measured by the level of income, together with the literacy level and the life expectancy. Now, we can actually explore, but in a limited way, some of the reasons for these poor outcomes. And I'll just pick a few. And one of them, if you look at what is called the Global Competitiveness Index, in terms of how well a country is positioned to be competitive. And this is a metric that is provided by the World Economic Forum. And in their reports, where they rank countries based on the key factors and they are in the relations that determine economic growth, and also a country's level of present and future prosperity, Africa countries score badly. Let me just give some insights into this. So the World Economic Forum, using this Global Competitiveness Index, it ranks 140 countries, where number one is the most competitive country, and number 140 is the least competitive. So if you look at the 2019 Global Competitiveness Report, which I analyzed, is that the raw average ranking for African countries in 2019 was 109, very close to 140, where 140 is the least competitive. And so when you also look at the pillars that comprise a country's competitiveness score, then in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, the pillars that score the least and also suggest the need for interventions are the pillar of innovations capacity. To what extent do countries innovate? The second pillar is ICT adaptation, which is also very close to innovations capacity. Another pillar where Africa's countries score very badly is market size. And finally, and I believe we all should be guessing this one, it is the pillar of infrastructure, where countries in Africa do very badly in infrastructure. And so with this low competitiveness scores for African countries, I make the conclusion that it is little wonder, therefore, that African share of global exports in 2020 was 2%. Now, let me repeat this. 20% of the global population which lives in Africa makes 2% of global exports. So that is a big, if I can call it, disproportion. And that is the indication of some of the big challenges that we deal with in Africa. And also, even this small share of global exports of 2%, most of the exports from African countries tend to be narrow. They tend to be undiversified, and they tend to be primary commodity products, which have a lot of substitutes. And no wonder, whenever there is a global shock, which affects the export markets, African countries suffer a lot because of the nature of the 2% proportion of global exports that Africa is able to put out there as exports. I can also share some other metrics. And this one is the savings and investments, where in Africa we have really very low savings and investments, which cannot sustain high real growth rates. So if you look at the investment to GDP ratio and the savings to GDP ratio for Africa, just combine them, they are all lower than 25%. The other parts of the world where we have such low ratios is Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, if you compare this with the developing Asia, the number for developing Asia is almost double in terms of the savings to GDP and investment to GDP. It's about 40%. And so these low investment levels and also low public investments in Africa are partly responsible for Africa's enormous infrastructure gap. And I did quote infrastructure as one of the areas where countries in Africa are very uncompetitive. So infrastructure gap in the areas of logistics, in the areas of transport, in the areas of energy, in the areas of water, schools, sanitation, hospitals, and so on. And so what then happens in the conspiracy of the issues and the challenges that I've indicated above is that then we end up with very high vulnerability of African economies to global challenges, global shocks, and lately we've got this global shock of climate change and the disasters that come with climate change. No wonder also the challenge of COVID-19 pandemic has negatively affected life around the globe and also continue to threaten the sustainability of decades-long investments and economic development that we have built through our resilience for a long time. Of course, other challenges that are appearing like geopolitics that also are leading to problems in terms of commodity prices and on. I mean, they affect Africa quite a lot because of our low base in terms of low savings and also other areas where we are not competitive. And so then what happens then is that this combination of challenged competitiveness, low socioeconomic outcomes places African economies in a fairly precarious position while responding to challenges like the COVID-19. And so as we do our planning within government and as we do our resource allocation. These are some of the things that we keep on bearing in mind because the issues of mobility are important, issues of borders, how we deal with border closures, especially within the COVID environment, how we deal with pandemics is very important. But then again, with limited fiscal space, then you find yourself with very little legroom to react and respond to challenges, which I think lately there have been a lot of havocs, a lot of shocks that have hit the globe and hit Africa as well. So let me just say, while higher than other emerging and developing countries, African growth remains insufficient. And this is an area where if we had sufficient growth, then we can say we'll make a dent on unemployment, we'll make a dent on poverty, but this has not been the case. And so that is why the subject that we are dealing with, where we are talking about locally led, locally relevant research agenda, is really very important because this will help us to be able to accelerate growth in Africa. And so I hope as we engage, we'll be able to identify critical areas of entry and the critical areas where the all-in research network can leverage on as we push in the agenda for development. Now, I can't fail to comment on human capital. We all should know that the place of leadership and skilled personnel is very key in development, and it's a fact. And so if you read the development literature on the rise of the Asian tigers, there's very, very clear demonstration on the role of leadership and human capital in development. So when you look at recent studies, there are some areas where the role of human capital has been highlighted significantly, where if you look at the performance in the public sector, the attribution for good governance, where this is the area of policies, the area of procedures, the area of systems and processes, is 80%. So let me repeat this because it's important. In the public sector, the attribution of governance is very high in terms of driving performance. So 80% of performance in the public sector is associated and accounted for by policies, by procedures, by systems and processes, while people account for the balance of 20%. So I believe in our engagement on this area of development, one of the things that we would really do well is to ensure that as we engage with the public sector, we have a way of ensuring that the best policies are being made, or there's a framework for making good policies. There's a framework of having world-class procedures. There's a framework of having good systems and also processes. Unfortunately, sometimes we find the public sector, there are a lot of historical ways of doing things which are deeply rooted in tradition, the culture of how public sector has been structured, and that leads to inefficient manual processes, which a lot of times are very unproductive. But then going back to my metrics, within the leadership, within the governance, leadership is very important. It accounts for 80% of the performance. So again, research in areas where we are able to identify what are the attributes of good leadership. How can we make sure that in the public sector, we have the right leadership in place? I believe this is an area where we can do very well in the area of research. So I want to say, and I want to propose us, that a logical entry point for ARN is support people development and also sharing of best practices, knowledge management, so that Africa can benefit from what has been done somewhere else successfully, and we leverage on that. This also can be supplemented by a technology-based, evidence-driven monitoring and evaluation system so that we continue to learn from what has happened. I think it will be remiss of me not to talk about education because there's a proven fact that education does indeed increase the propensity for better employment opportunities, which David did mention about opportunities being very, very important. And so education, of course, enhances creativity. We are looking for that. It enhances innovation, equality, social well-being, increased productivity, also improved rates of participation. And this, of course, does boost economic growth and also increase the GDP of a country. And so by allowing people to have better lives, better quality lifestyles with high standards of living, this then moves a country to a higher level. And so my submission here is that in Africa, we must invest in the skills of its people to advance and improve their standards of living. And so I want to ask a question to us, and it's just to ask, how can ARN promote the uptake of appropriate education in Africa? And this is an uptake of education in all aspects of primary, tertiary, and university education. I believe there's a fertile area where we can engage in this. Well, I did mention infrastructure earlier on, but then let me just say something short on infrastructural development, where obviously there has been a lot of efforts in achieving regional infrastructure connectivity across the continent, but we still do face quite serious infrastructure deficiencies across many sectors. And this is both in terms of access and the quality. So if you look at the World Bank study, there's one that I'm quoting of 2017, that the lack of modern infrastructure in Africa cost the continent at least 2% in GDP growth annually. Now, that is a substantive number. 2% of GDP growth lost annually through infrastructure, which is inadequate. And this, in a way, then cuts business productivity by as much as 40%. So we can see then where the competitiveness in Africa gets lost as part of the challenges that we are looking at. If you look at the systems in Africa in terms of infrastructure which need to be developed, there are many. I mean, electricity grid, roads, railways, and communication, and so on and so forth. And so this is an area where we can address ourselves to, including clean water, sanitation, and so on and so forth. And so I want to submit to us that it is very important and imperative that Africa governments' development plans should clearly mainstream the development, the management, and maintenance of appropriate infrastructure through a combination of what I call public investments and public-private partnership. And this requires establishing an enabling environment and also appropriate framework, because private sector is indeed the agent of development, while the government endeavors to create an enabling environment for private sector to thrive. And so in our research area, in our evidence-driven area, it's just to look for ways in which we can create a mechanism for the private sector, for the public sector, and the research institutions to work together. Now, my last 2 points is also on technology and social safety. And I want to say that we've seen lately a widespread adoption of digital technology, which is supporting new ways of doing business. And here we can include mobile payments and so on and so forth, which could help struggling African economies to leapfrog from poverty to economic growth and stability. And so I want to submit that access to technology must be coupled to socio-economic welfare, and in this case, innovations in health, innovations in education, and commerce must address the most vulnerable members of the society. And so we have to look at what support then could be offered to various schemes, frameworks that accelerate adoption of critical technology infrastructure development, to ensure that we leverage in Africa on such technology. And we can explore through a lot of engagements on how to participate effectively in this space. In Kenya, for instance, we have witnessed the technology has enabled digitization of social services, where we have been adopting digital learning, health coverage, and mobile banking through the M-Pesa tool. This then leads me to comment on social safety nets. Because of challenges of poverty, inequality, of course, we must ensure that we reduce the areas of inequality in Africa. And so we need then to have good systems where we can be able to help citizens to live a better life. Because of course, as I said earlier on, in Africa, we tend to be affected a lot by natural disasters. And so in this regard, it's just to look at how we can use research to ensure that we are able to grow revenues so that we can be able to provide equity in opportunities, especially to focus on the less disadvantaged. So finally, we have a youthful population in Africa. And so this youthful population does present a potential asset which can be employed in Africa. And we say that investing in our youth is an investment in Africa's future. And so just to ask ourselves the question is, what role can ARN play in promoting youth employment, youth engagement? Some of the intervention can also be fashioned to address issues like youth values, youth mindsets, where we'll be looking to move away youth from subsistence mindsets, from dependency mindsets, to mindsets that are empowered, to mindsets that are enabled, to mindsets that are connected, and to mindsets that lead to patriotic youth. And so, friends, let me conclude and hope that the metrics that I've shared have demonstrated the state of development in Africa, and indeed the very urgent need for accelerated growth that is evidence-driven. And so no doubt, given the objectives of ARN, I can see many areas of relevance and also critical points of entry to support this desired growth. With these very many remarks, I wish to extend my sincere gratitude to all of us for listening to me, and wish the ARN initiative great success in supporting the creation of a locally led, local relevant research agenda to support credible, inclusive, and sustainable development in Africa. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for your remarks. I appreciate the contextualization and the challenges you pose to the research network and its members. So thank you so much for that. Now we're transitioning to a brief panel that I will pass to Michael Carter to introduce and facilitate. Michael?
All right. Thank you, Tara, and thank you, PS, for your remarks and the time that you shared with us. So let's move right along, and I think we have about 20 minutes left here. And we're very fortunate to be joined today by Pierre Jacquet of the Global Development Network and Joseph Sisentango of the Global Innovation Fund. These two organizations are organizations that share many of the goals of All In. And so we're really happy to have this launch event as a way to explore ways we might join forces with the Global Development Network and the Global Innovation Fund. So I thought to get the conversation going, I would pose a couple of questions to Pierre and Joseph. So Pierre, if you're okay, I'd like to start with you. I've certainly been familiar with the GDN since it was launched over 20 years ago by the World Bank, if I remember correctly. GDN is now a freestanding international organization. From its inception, the GDN has always promoted exactly what interests All In: locally conducted social science research with the idea that this kind of research can effectively influence public policy in developing countries. So I was curious, Pierre, could you give us a little bit of the history of GDN as you know it? How did GDN take up this motivation and this idea that locally conducted research could be particularly impactful. And secondly, and relatedly, do you have any examples that really stand out to you in your years with the GDN, where you really see how locally conducted research has been able to shape policy? So Pierre, thank you very much for joining us.
Sure, thank you, and thank you, Michael, and thank you, David, and all of you for this invitation, and congratulations for the launch of this very important network that indeed resonates very much with GDN and GDN's mission. So as you mentioned, GDN was first a creation of the World Bank, and it was under the impulsion of Joseph Stiglitz, who was then the chief economist of the bank, for reasons that are still very much valid today. If you look at today's development research, it continues to be heavily polarized, with almost 90% of published articles written in northern universities and research centers. So research on development in developing countries is written mainly in developed countries. If one focuses only on the production of scientific knowledge, this may not be a problem, because scientific knowledge is a global public good, and it's more efficient to have it produced in the best existing centers, and there are economies of scale in producing it in the best universities, which happen to be in developed countries for a lot of reasons. But this is what Stiglitz called disembodied knowledge. If one is interested in the connection between social science and policy, or more generally, social science and action, then this imbalance is a major impediment, because as he already argued in 1999, the use of research is something very different from the production of research. The use of research is by nature embodied in local culture, practices, polities, and is by itself a social and political process. So this disconnect between the scientific content of knowledge production and the embodied social and political nature of the use of scientific knowledge is something that has been ignored for many decades and is still being ignored by major research funders nowadays. And I'm glad to hear that USAID has been moving toward localization, because I think it's crucial to this connection that interests all of us between research and action. So Joe Stiglitz wanted to mobilize developing country-based development research through a global network, hence the creation of GDN in 1999. And the mission of GDN until that date is to identify, select, train, and globally connect researchers in developing countries so that they can develop their own strengths and contribute to policy debates and policy design in their own countries and globally. So to sum up, locally produced research is to be thought not only as a productive device, i.e. producing research papers, but also as an indispensable intermediary between scientific production, wherever it is produced, and its use in policy and action. So do we have example of the connection between research and policy? I want to give a qualified yes. So the first part of the answer is yes, we do have example. And I recall, for example, a piece of research conducted in Sri Lanka as part of a global research program funded by the Japanese government, which reflected on the role and design of climate insurance for dry zone farmers in Sri Lanka. And two of the recommendations of that paper were taken as such in the national budget speech in the Sri Lankan parliament. So that's an indication of a direct connection between researchers' recommendations and policy. More recently, a piece of research on research in Myanmar before the coup was discussed within the government and helped shape the country's research policy. And there are several other examples. And this one is part of a global project we have called Doing Research, which conducts in partnerships with local research institutions, rigorous assessments of social science research systems in developing countries. Now, and this is a qualified part of the answer, I would like to emphasize that this is only one aspect, and in my view, not the most important one, of the connection between local research and policy. The main contributions for me are, and beyond producing research papers that will be used directly in the policy process, which can happen, but it seems to me that the main contributions are elsewhere, and they are threefold. First, we are talking about the ability for domestic research institutions to set their own research agenda, to define their own problems, their own approaches to address these problems. And this is an essential component of development ownership. And by the way, and this is a comment on the very important objective of all-in that David explained earlier, it's not going to be easy. Our own experience that when you try to mobilize developing country researchers for an international competitive call for them, they actually interpret the call and try to respond in a way that they think will please the International Selection Committee. And when they do that, it leads them to actually pick themes and methods that are fashionable in the global research community, which is dominated by the North. So the bias toward Northern methods and themes is built in, and building ownership is actually a difficult effort. It requires all our efforts, and it's worth doing, obviously, but it's not as automatic as simply providing money for local research in developing countries, because in the end, what interests researchers is to be globally recognized. And this is perfectly understandable. So this bias of which I think is pervasive right now in many scientific disciplines globally, is something that we need to really put our minds together to try to address. So, but the first part of it is really ownership through setting their own research agenda. The second thing is the ability to critically assess existing scientific knowledge and existing evidence, which provides analytical capacity to deal with policy issues, to shape solutions that are meaningful. So it's not a question of research giving the solutions. It's a question of research helping shape the solutions by the actors in charge of implementing the solutions, which is quite different. And that goes beyond the role of research in policymaking, and it also matters for private actions. For example, when one tries to look at how the private sector can create meaningful societal impact. And we had a recent project with the EIB that mobilized African researchers to conduct impact research on impact investments funded by the EIB. It was a very, very interesting and productive project. And finally, I think the role of research is also to help strengthen the quality of the debate about policy. And by doing so, that strengthens the democracy. So I think all these roles of research shouldn't be underestimated and forgotten to the benefit of research as producing papers that will include recommendations for policymakers. And by the way, this is probably not the way policy works in many countries, as we just heard. So in a nutshell, the role of development research, in my mind, is not only to provide solutions, it is rather to encourage the evidence-informed design of solutions by policymakers. And this is what GDN tries to and has been trying to do for these 2 decades now. Thank you.
Great. Pierre, thank you. That was very rich insight. And I'll just very quickly remark that as we went through our all-in process, it really stood out to me that many of the researchers were not really empowered or didn't feel empowered to really drive the agenda as they wanted. And when I spoke to people later on about making good proposals, I stressed passion. I said, you have to really believe that this is important. You make the case and don't really care what the call for proposal said, because if you can really convince the reader, the evaluator, that this is something important and you're thinking about it differently, then that's what makes it powerful. Anyway, there'd be many more things we could talk about there, but thank you very much. I'd like to turn to Joseph now. So Joseph, you're with the Global Innovation Fund, which relies on evidence to guide allocations, particularly of impact investment funds that are intended to improve the lives of poor people. I wonder, sort of in the same spirit as Pierre, if you could share with us any examples you have about how the Global Investment Fund's investment in innovative programs have been guided by evidence, and also secondarily, do you have any particular favorite stories about locally based researchers playing an important role in generating the kind of evidence that helps you shape the allocation decisions that you make for investment funds. So Joseph, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thanks to ICE and Feed the Future Innovation Lab for setting this event up and to bring this vision to fruition. I remember being in Nairobi a couple of months ago and meeting with David and colleagues, and it's really a privilege as a Ugandan evaluator representing the Global Innovation Fund to be at this launch. Perhaps I can give a bit of background on what the Global Innovation does for the benefit of the audience. So we are a nonprofit social innovation funder that is set up to partner with government aid agencies to bring a venture approach to global development programs. So in fact, USAID is one of our initial backers, as well as DFID, which is now FCDO, CEDA, the Australian government, the South African government, and the Canadian government. So we invest in social innovations that aim to meaningfully improve the lives of people living under less than $5 a day. And as Permanent Secretary Muyas illustrated, we're well aware of the fact that a large proportion of this population lives in sub-Saharan Africa. We provide flexible capital and a broad range of financial instruments. So basically, we can take equity, provide loans, or also provide grants to nonprofits that are serving the global poor. And we've backed up to 60 innovations. We've backed 60 innovations as of this week since 2016. I think our definition of innovation is quite broad, and I think it's important to stress this, that innovation can be some sort of behavioral intervention, it can be a technological one, or it can be a policy. So this sort of wide lens to defining innovation enables us really to think of locally relevant solutions. It would be odd for an organization based in London and Washington, DC to sort of sit down and say, what is the theory of change on this problem, and how can we solve it? We really try to seek out innovations that have been tested on the ground by organizations that are based on the ground and look to how we can bring them to scale. Maybe very briefly, I'll talk about how we use evidence criteria, which is really weaved into our investment criteria, into our investment process, sorry. So we have what we call internal evidence. We look at evidence related to the implementation of a proposed innovation, which is in a similar context or setting to which GIF's investment will support. For instance, is it in the same province, or is it a neighboring one? So this is really looking at whether the intervention has a same or similar delivery mechanism and the expected outcome to what we're looking to invest in. This often stems from prior studies by the innovator. We also look at external evidence, which is looking at interventions that are in some way comparable to the one under consideration and the experience in other locations. This is in a way bringing in the idea of generalizability, but sort of trying to break it down into how locally applicable is it, and what are the role that local institutions and actors play. And then, as mentioned earlier, the part about the theory of change, which really stress test, capturing how the different moving parts will fit in to be able to scale a given innovation. To your question about highlights in the portfolio, I generally don't like singling out specific examples. When we were at the Evidence to Action conference in Accra 3 years ago, we presented 3 innovations in our portfolio. One which is Ideas 42, which is looking at cost-effective nudges in improving outcomes for social protection. And we all know how social protection and safety nets are now, particularly post-COVID, playing a very great role in the development field. There's Lively Minds, which is an implementation in Ghana based on mothers' engagement in early childhood education, which is being scaled through the Ghana Education Service. So these are some examples of innovations that are really embedded with national programs where we've been able to generate some form of rigorous evidence that has assisted on the journey to scale. In terms of involvement of local researchers, the short answer is yes. But we really look at the emergence of an entity or a research network like All-In as a great opportunity to really drive that even further. Our model is based on scaling innovations with impact. And it goes without saying that having local context and ideas that are developed and are owned in a local context and with local researchers involved in the production of that knowledge, it's mightily important. So we're looking to increase more and more how much we engage with local owners and local researchers. And maybe one final point, which is also around the ethics aspect of it. So we always ensure that local IRBs are actually involved in the aspect of reviewing research plans. This is part of our research and transparency guidelines, really to try and ensure that work is locally relevant and conducted in the most ethical manner possible. I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Joseph. Again, a very rich set of comments and reflections. I was going to put a last question to you. It was really meant as a fishing expedition. Maybe I'll just sort of toss it out there. But with this All-In program, we invested about $6 million in research, and we stirred up quite a lot of interest. And the fishing is, we'd certainly, Joseph and Pierre both, we'd like to find a time, it's probably not now since we're out of time, but we'd like to find a time to talk with you, to brainstorm, to think about how we can mobilize some additional funds as we build this network up and really begin trying to empower people to expand the kind of opportunities that are made available. So if you have any real quick thoughts, we can share them, but if not, consider yourselves at least on the hook for a moment with this very brief fishing. So Joseph or Pierre, did anything else you'd like to say at this stage to that?
Well, certainly to share your main objective and to raise not only money, but political support globally to this idea that the localization of the production of research is fundamental. It is fundamental when we believe in the role of evidence, in connecting evidence and knowledge with policymaking. It's fundamental for democracies. And it requires a departure from the way research is seen today and funded today. So indeed, that requires talking together and putting that on the table globally, because that requires a change in mind. And again, it's encouraging to hear that a big donor like USAID is thinking in the same line. And there are some others, and in France, which is my country also, and in other places. So it seems that the momentum is shaping, and it's the right time to actually put all these initiatives together and see what we can do in a cooperative manner, because cooperation will bring not only more resources, but also effectiveness and impact. So I think that all of us, at least here in this panel, have in mind the fact that joining forces with others and seeing how we can be complementary is certainly a key to the future.
Okay, thank you. Joseph, do you want a final word before we turn over to David?
Sure. I mean, I completely echo Pierre's sentiments. There's a responsibility for all stakeholders, from policymakers, academics, implementers, and funders such as us, to enable a greater use of locally led evidence to address development needs. I think this is a reflection also of this shift which Pierre is alluding to in the last few years, that has seen really this movement really metabolize and really become mainstream to a certain extent this idea of greater involvement of Southern actors in shaping their development agenda. So, you know, any role that GIF can play in terms of supporting this sort of work is something that we're willing to explore, and we are primary consumers and generators. Actually, what the piece I didn't mention is that not only we look at evidence when we invest, but we also look at what evidence can be generated and what role will it play, you know, so sort of the evidence out of the as part of the innovation. So we welcome this dialogue, and thank you once again for the opportunity.
Okay. So again, let me thank you on behalf of the entire ICE Innovation Lab All-In group for your time and sharing your thoughts. And we will be back in touch. So again, thank you, Pierre and Joseph. David, I think it goes to you for a closing remark.
Yes, thank you very much. We are so excited for the almost 100 people who have been able to participate. We send our sincere gratitude to the PS, to Pierre, to Joseph, to Don, who in their busy schedules have been able to join us today. Markiel and Tara, I know it's 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. in California, getting up early for the work that have gone in. We really, really appreciate everybody's time joining us today, and we encourage you to encourage others to be part of the All-In network. And we hope that with this network, we will be able to make contribution to the socioeconomic development of Africa and global South as a whole. Thank you, and we appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.